The U.S. National Hurricane Center, Hurricane Helene, which made landfall in Florida as a Category 4, has now weakened to a tropical storm as it moves further inland. The agency says conditions are still life-threatening with storm surge warnings in place. Hurricane Helene, one of the biggest storms to ever hit the Gulf Coast, barreling across Georgia towards Tennessee and the Carolinas. Residents are speaking about the devastating conditions.
We have some windows on the front of our house. They were able to bring their inflatable raft with a motor on it. They shined some lights towards the windows. We responded with the same. They were able to open the front door and then escort us off the island onto the boat.
On the impacts that we are expecting to see from Hurricane Helene. And as I told him, we have been preparing for this storm for a number of days, and we began moving resources into Florida on Monday. I just want everybody to know that this is going to be a multi-state event with the potential for significant impacts from Florida all the way to Tennessee. And the President wants to make sure that everyone is paying attention to the potential life-threatening impacts that this storm may bring, and he has directed me to travel there tomorrow to assess the impacts.
For more on this weather challenge, I'm joined by Dr. Justin Ude, Senior Consultant in Climate Resilience, Adaptation Planning and Carbon Management with Turner & Townsend. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ude, on The World Now. Hurricane Helene made landfall as Category 4 storm, bringing catastrophic flooding to Florida and Georgia. What factors would you say contributed to its rapid intensification?
Okay, thank you so much, Ifemi, for this question and the opportunity to air my views on this one. Yes, to look at factors. Before I get into that, but let me give maybe a brief background. You see, the whole Gulf of Mexico, including Florida, is not stranger to the issues around hurricane or dangerous or powerful storms, as we have seen in the case of Helene. Historically, we've had history, we have trends of these storms happening in this particular region before. In 2004 alone, there were about 4 of such hurricanes happening consistently in the same year. In 2005, there were other 2, including the world-breaking Hurricane Katrina that we all know about. And these events have been happening in this location consistently. But if you look at the question you've asked about what possibly would have been the cause of this, it's a combination of different factors primarily. But what's in recent times I'm careful about jumping into is to say that, oh, it's as a result of climate change, a result of climate change. No, not really. We don't need to get into that first. But we'll look at the warm ocean waters around that part of the Atlantic Ocean, the moist air temperature instability in the area, as well as the low wind shear. You see, that's really would be what we will attribute as the causes of these of powerful storms in the first place. But if you have to admit and link it now to maybe say a climate change related disaster or forced hurricane, then we can look deeper into the warmer temperature issue, because climate change is a leading cause, if you know, global warming. It causes a high surface temperature increase and provides a more energy surface, you call it, for hurricane to take up. Sea level rise would also be a factor that climate change would, you want to link to climate change, because it exacerbates storm surges, for example. Or if you look at increase in atmospheric moisture, what that means is that a warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, leading to heavier rainfall, or sometimes some places we call torrential rainfall. That will happen, and of course, it might, maybe hurricane will pick that up from there, or if you talk about shifting in wind patterns. So this will ordinarily be the primary pickups for hurricane to form and have these devastating impacts that you have seen in the case of Hurricane Helene in Florida, and of course others have been happening even up to last year in the Gulf of Mexico.
Looking ahead, Mr. Yudi, what steps should policymakers and stakeholders take to address flood risks and climate resilience in vulnerable regions like this? That's a good question. And in recent times, in the past 5 years, we have seen in the industry an uptake of what we call climate resilience. There's a good conversation now between politicians, policymakers, like you call them, as well as the private sector, to look at the real investment or what I call a significant attention on climate adaptation planning, or even an improvement in existing disaster management protocols in different parts of the world. To be more specific in this case, the case of Hurricane Helene, or looking at Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, or in other places, parts of the world where these disasters are becoming more frequent. We want to consider a readjustment or a review or strengthening of infrastructure code. For example, building codes in these places need to be enforced with stringent hurricane-resistant kind of materials to ensure that they reduce the impact on critical infrastructure, including housing, elevating homes and building in places that are not too below sea level rise, or that could help storm drains and construction of maybe levees to help, cushion the impact of flood if it is coming to where there are critical assets that will need to be considered. There are other aspects of nature-based solutions that has to do with restoring mangroves and wetlands in some places, including forest development to deal with that. That could form one. There is need for improved emergency management preparedness generally. That comes from the disaster management part of it, and what we used to call integrated emergency and disaster management responses. All of these need to be reviewed with the understanding of the magnitude of, say, a Category 5 Category 4 kind of storm. That I understand that these solutions are not exhaustive. We have to go now, but briefly, if you can, do you think there are international cooperation and climate agreements that can further support global efforts to addressing flooding of this nature?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are. If we step back to the Paris Agreement in 2025, Paris Agreement in 2015, yes, Paris Agreement has a lot. And even before the Paris Agreement, there have been other international collaborations and discussions. Currently, the world is meeting in America to discuss some of these issues. So that the UN provides a platform for every country, for every geographical locations to discuss and come up with domestic, if you like, regional climate adaptation responses and financing that could at least highlight most very vulnerable parts of the world, vulnerable geographies of the world, and give them special attention so that we could reduce the impact on critical infrastructure, reduce the impact on fatalities or lives and livelihoods, and of course have a better world that we think we'll be able to live in.
Dr. Justin Yudi, thank you so much for sharing with us on the world.
Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.